Going to go ahead and it looks like, by my count, it says 16 participants. Uh, I do think it's helpful for those who are not speaking to mute themselves. I think it helps with feedback. But Cece was telling me that we have, and I think like 42 people sign up as of this morning, which is just, I mean, just wonderful. I'm really so excited about that. Just for us to have the opportunity to get together monthly. My name's Michael Alloy. I'm a U.S. Magistrate Judge for the Northern District of West Virginia. Part of these meetings is really collaboration between the Sunshine Committee and our president's initiative to really talk about balance in the bench. And he's unable, I think, to be with us today because he had a full docket. So I'm happy to take the lead on it and sort of facilitate things. The topic that we chose today was really public speaking. And if you'll recall, after our first meeting, people brought up a number of topics. And so what we did afterwards was send out a quick questionnaire, CC did, and it seemed to be that the interest was in public speaking. And I don't look, we're judges. We all know how to speak publicly. I think really the issue is how do we go about that and certainly be mindful of our ethical obligations, and how do we do that in a way that's consistent with the responsibility we have to uphold the rule of law. So two things I wanted to share with you real quickly, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And believe me, part of this is for us to learn from each other, and in particular, think about how you've shared your message of your job as a judge, the judiciary, in what's been effective in the audience that you've had, whether it's lawyers, school people, the public. So I'm looking at the code of conduct for United States judges, and there are two that I I think kind of speak to how we do our jobs as judges, especially in relating to the public. And the canon one is a judge should uphold the integrity and independence of the judiciary. For me, it feels like it's being attacked at every level. So how do we respond to that in a way that's consistent with the rule? Because if you go on with the rule, it says an independent and honorable judiciary is indispensable to justice in our society. A judge should maintain and enforce high standards of conduct and should personally observe those standards so that the integrity and independence of the judiciary may be preserved. The provisions of this code should be construed and applied to further that objective. Yeah, so that the integrity and independence of the judiciary may be preserved. However, it's Code of Ethics 4, the Canon 4, provides that we should have complete separation of a judge from extrajudicial activities is neither possible nor wise. A judge should not become isolated from the society in which the judge lives. As a judicial officer and a person specially learned in law, a judge is in a unique position to contribute to the law, the legal system, and the administration of justice, including revising substantive and procedural law and improving criminal and juvenile justice. To the extent that the judge's time permits and impartiality is not compromised, the judge is encouraged to do so, either independently or through a bar association, judicial conference, or other organization dedicated to the law. Subject to the same limitations that judges may also engage in a wide range of non-related activities. So obviously, when they talk about our obligation to preserve respect for the law, I'm real curious if anyone wants to answer this or feels comfortable doing so, because I hear it every day. How have you been able to defend, if at all, the recent rulings of our U.S. Supreme Court, and or do you simply say that's the court, and my job is to honor those rulings, and I have no comment on the wisdom of those rulings or or an opinion on it? Yeah, Dina's ready to go. Go
No,
ahead,
I have
Dina.
a question on your question. Are you asking us whether we are in our private conversations with our friends, whether we're taking a position, or in our public facing uh role if we're
I,
taking a
oh,
position?
oh no, I think we're talking about public speaking. So how do we handle that? And I think the answer, how have we handled it?
That's a very tough question.
Well, it is, right? But I mean, and believe me, maybe there's not an answer for it, and I'd like to hear from you. But every day, I hear it from people who say, "My God, the federal courts are doing everything they can. 70-page opinions, really thoughtful, doing things. It's really protecting the rule of law to have a yeah, to have the shadow docket just overdo it within 5 minutes in the two lines." And so, what do you think of that? And my response is generally no comment. And I don't know. I don't. And I
So
think
are
making
they asking you these questions in court or in your, in your official position as judge? I mean, I have those conversations with friends all the time. I tell them what I really think, but I haven't really had that question in the professional
yeah.
context.
Well, I wonder if anyone has, because what I'm thinking of, Dina, not in personal ones, but in civics presentations in front of bar groups, your state bar association. It looks like Marcia has something to say about it. Go ahead, Marcia.
Hi, good morning or good
Good
afternoon,
morning.
everyone, depending on where you're located. I did have this very question, two related questions come up when I was speaking to a group of law students at a local law school here. I was like a speaker in a class, and afterwards, the students came up to ask questions. And one of them, after a very long preamble about the Supreme Court shadow docket, essentially asked me, whether I agree with it, what do I think about it, what do I have to say about it? And my answer was the latter of the two that you said, which was that, because of the code of, the canons and the code of ethics, I'm not really permitted to comment on those. These are decisions of the Supreme Court that I'm obligated as a judge of a trial court to follow. And that was the end of that. One thing that, and I told the professor afterwards, because I got another question related to, uh, I got a question related to the fact that there have been the strikes on boats that are coming out of Venezuela and the Caribbean region. And my family's from the Caribbean. That's part of my public
Uh,
bio. And so a student asked me, well, what do you think about these extrajudicial killings of unarmed citizens? And I said, I don't comment on administration policies. And she seemed stunned that I had to answer in that way. And I said all of this to the professor afterwards, who said that, should she ever have another judge or myself, she will just put the disclaimer out at the beginning of the
sure.
talk or the presentation that, while the judge is happy to entertain questions from students, that there are certain areas or topics that, based on the code of ethics and the canons, that she can't comment on. Now, might it be the case that some students still try to push the envelope? Go for it, law students. You're
Yeah.
advocates, right? You're advocates in training. Do that. But my response would still be that I couldn't respond.
Is your family okay, Marcia?
Oh yeah, totally. They have nothing to do with any of this.
Okay.
It was just a student who saw that in my bio and said,
Okay.
"Oh, you're
Okay.
of Caribbean descent. Do you have a comment on this policy affecting the Caribbean?"
Yeah. Hey, by the way, and I see your hand, Willie. And so certainly raising your hand, I um I would ask Cece to let me know because I don't think I can see everyone on my screen. So if you want to speak up, that's fine. But Willie, go ahead. And by the way, that was you and your beautiful little girl at the workshop, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you for hosting this discussion today.
Yeah.
This is so timely. I'm learning a lot. I love Marsha's answer. I think she hit it out the park. That should be our answer. I get those questions a lot when we have groups visiting our courthouse. I don't even want a teacher or the head of an organization to chill out those questions. I think they need to ask those questions and then learn how our system works, because then I use it as an opportunity to explain I have a ton of personal opinions about what is happening with this president, this administration, the Supreme Court, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. But I also say, professionally, I have an obligation to follow whatever my district judges and circuit judges and Supreme Court justices say I should do. So I talk about sometimes when I open a newspaper, I don't recognize the person they're talking about. When I dismiss a certain lawsuit that seems something that I would like to see move forward or support, that's not my role. I do not have, my opinion does not matter when I issue an order or an opinion. And I want the students, I want the civic leaders to know that I put aside Willie Epps's opinions when I do my job. And when I have issues that come before our court, I take a look at the facts. I have law clerks and I take a look at the case law. And then based on what the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit here in Missouri says I should do, or what the U.S. Supreme Court says I should, that's what I do. I follow the law, and it's that simple. But I tell them in my personal life, oh yeah, I've got plenty of opinions, but you won't hear about them unless I hang up the black robe and I decide to be, take another role publicly where I can comment on what I believe in. So I think Marsha's answers were perfect.
Yeah, no, that's great, Willie. And one of the things that you pointed out is that it really is a good educational moment to talk about who we are as a judicial branch, because everything's become so politicized. I would always tell my law students and people in front of me, you have to understand when I became a judge, I basically gave up most of my First Amendment rights, if not all of them, in terms of speaking in public. I don't have those. I can't exercise them like you can. I have a job. I don't choose my cases. The ones that come before me, I do my job. Are there plenty of things that Congress has done that I don't agree with? Well, sure. Plenty of things that the Supreme Court has done that I don't agree with it, yes. But that's not my role. My role is to follow the directives I've received, and that's it. And so I think you're right, Willie Ann, with Sharon, is that it is a chance to educate about that. Go ahead, Willie.
Just one follow-up. Dina made a comment that touched into my world as well. So I too talk to very close friends and family members about my personal opinions about the events of the day. But I do have a couple of judicial colleagues and mentors with so much more experience than I do who caution me big time about whether to have those conversations on the phone or send certain text messages. I can think of one mentor who just says, you're just opening yourself up to having some serious issues if someone betrays your trust. Can you touch on that issue with the code of conduct, and should we feel safe in today's environment having discussions with our one sibling or a parent, our best friend about the events of the day?
Well, Willie, and please, I want to hear from others. I have to tell you that certainly there are plenty of family texts that circulate in our family that my response is I cannot comment because of my judicial position. Because I have to tell you, I think there's some real concern about being very, very careful, even if it's private, if it's documented. You don't know what your friends are going to say. And I'll give you an example. Is that I teach ethics, and there was a judge who had dinner with his family, And if you're around your children of a certain age, they can't get off the phone. And so the judge said, Dad, I understand that you have a sentencing, Mara. Yeah, I do. Isn't that guy who killed so and so? Yes, it is. And the dad just basically said, I'm going to fry him tomorrow. And lo and behold, it took a matter of seconds where the daughter puts out on social media, Dad says he's going to fry this guy tomorrow. Well, lo and behold, that judge resigned the next day. And so what you say, Willie, boy, you have to be just real comfortable who you're sharing it with. And I have to tell you, my confidants really are other fellow judges, and who I trust, who I think when we talk about balance in the law, guys, it's not unhealthy, not it is unhealthy not to have these discussions with people that we can trust, or will just explode. Um, I don't think so, and that's part of the reasons we do this. I'll share one other thing too, is I don't know if you saw that a judge who was 78 years old, and someone may know, I think he was a district judge, 78 years old, was appointed by President Ford, and basically announced his retirement. And he said very specifically, I am retiring, so now I can speak publicly about what I think is an assault on democracy and how are we close to losing the rule of law. And so this is how serious I am about it. I resign. Did anyone else see that? It was in the New York Times. And Dina, who was the judge? Do you?
I was just going to try to look for the article because I read it yesterday, I think it was. He was a judge from Boston. So he was a senior judge in Boston, and he said that he was resigning from his senior status. So his spot had already been replaced a decade ago. So he'd been a senior judge for a number of years, and he said that he was resigning so that he could take a public stand against what Trump is doing on behalf of himself and other judges who can't speak out because, they're bound by the rules of ethics. But I can't
Judge
remember.
Mark Wolf. Mark Wolf.
Mark who? Wolf?
Mark Wolf, WOLF. And he wrote that article in the Atlantic magazine. And it looks like he was a Reagan appointed judge.
Reagan appointed, that's right. Yeah, they have that in Axios, but I read it in the New York. Yeah, they have it in the New York Times, saying that it's an existential threat to democracy. That's the title of the article. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting that he felt like he had to retire in order to be able to go out and say the things that he wanted to say, accusing the government of doing what it's doing. And I think that that's right, that in terms of taking a very public stance, we can't do that. But, the point that Willie raises, that we have to be careful who we write things to. And I know that there are judges on my court who won't write anything because they think that Big Brother is going through all of our emails searching for stuff, and they won't put anything in writing that's critical of anyone. I'm probably going to be the first one fired because I'm not careful enough. I will send around articles saying, did you see this? And so I don't always say things like, can you believe what the president is doing? But I'll send an article where people are like, being fired, and I'll say, are we next? That kind of thing. And so, yeah, we do have to be very careful. I have edited myself, even talking to other judges. We recently had some habeas things come up because of the way that the government is now interpreting deportations and who's entitled to a bond hearing, and they're going under one statutory provision which really doesn't apply to people who have already been in the country. And we've seen habeas petitions on that, and a Republican appointed district judge sent me that, and I wrote the opinion and he liked it. And he goes, well, maybe they'll get the message now. And instead of writing back what I really thought, I was like, one can hope. And, so yes, I do think we do have to be in this climate careful about what we put in writing. And me, myself, have to take that advice that, even with friends and family, because you don't know. What if your daughter sends something out like that and you have to retire? That would really be awful, and totally unexpected. So these are things that we have to be a little bit careful about. And I need to like put a string around my finger, because I'm really bad. I say what I think. That's me. That's who I am. Dan's laughing over there, but anyone who knows me knows that's true. I pull no punches. I tell you exactly what I think, and I'll probably get into trouble for it.
Hey, Michael, you're muted, I think.
I saw, Cyrus, you unmuted yourself, so I didn't know whether you wanted to say something or not. I just want to make sure I don't miss people there.
No, that was by accident. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. So one of the things I'd like to hear from you all, because I do think that we have an obligation when we talk to groups to promote the rule of law. And so what kind of language have you all used to promote the rule of law? I can tell you, for me, I always start out with justice for all. Especially in these days of DEI has been stripped from everything. But I will say, justice for all is justice for all. It's not justice for some. And justice for all is essential to who we are as a democracy, who we are as a judicial system, because if we start saying it's for some, then it's for no one. And so it has to be all. And so by its very nature, I can't think of any word that's more inclusive than all. And I hope I get them thinking, but what I have to say in that regard, and in terms of that the law has to be accessible to everyone, and that the rule of law also means due process, meaning just the decency and essentialness of being heard before anything happens to you. And I try to stay away from examples, simply helping people to understand that. I mean, has anyone had some messaging that they've been very comfortable with, that they think sort of brings home the points that are important when we speak to groups about our roles as judges? Anyone have any examples they want to share?
I've done some teaching to high school students who, very disheartening to me, they're totally unaware of what's going on in our country, politically, and even an understanding of the separation of powers and the rule of law. I do talk about the law applying equally to all people, and I ask questions, to say, should it apply equally? Do you think that, things to those effects, so that they will think about how the rule of law should apply to everyone equally, and whether everyone should be treated the same way. And does it matter whether you have money, or does it matter whether you have political connections, or, or should, I say this, and maybe I'll get fired for this one. I'll say, can President Trump, if I have a case in front of me that involves one of President Trump's executive orders, can he call me up and tell me how to rule? Can he tell me what I'm supposed to do in that case? And then, I tell them, no. I said, he might think he can call me and tell me what I should do, but I have to follow the rule of law. And whatever the law is, that's what I'm going to apply. So I do bring examples from politics into what I'm talking about, because I'm trying to make it real. I'm trying to not be abstract about, oh, what is the rule of law? It sounds so weird. And separation of powers. I do talk about that, and I use examples. That's a separation of power example. Can the executive tell a judge how to rule? And I talk about how other countries, if they wanted to join the EU, they had to change the way their judiciary operated, where the executive couldn't tell the judiciary how to rule anymore, because if you do that, you can't join the EU. And so we have that in this country. But I will tell you that one high school teacher told me that he is feeling very hamstrung on teaching, and that he doesn't even know what he's allowed to teach anymore, because he's afraid of getting in trouble. Even talking about history or separation of powers, or how the government is formed. And that's a big concern. And here in Houston, in the Southern District of Texas, we're starting the Federal Bar Association is starting a civics program where we're going to record some messages, and I'm the speaker for the first few. And I did some reading, and Sandra Day O'Connor had started a foundation where they were providing materials to schools on teaching civics and all this stuff. And the article in the New York Times that I read said that the demand was down substantially in the last year, that that schools aren't asking for these materials. Schools are changing how they're teaching in response to the climate. That's very scary.
Yeah. Janice, I know you're here with us. I saw you earlier. And are you with us, Janice? There you are. Maybe she's not listening. Janice, from Louisiana, New Orleans. So, one of the things you talked about in this civics education, for example, how do we speak about January 6th? I don't know how many of you all on listening to this had a January 6th case. I did, and I had one very early on, and so I have no hesitancy in talking about why I made my decisions in that case based upon the facts that they were presented to me. It was a public hearing. Everyone could see those facts, hear those facts, could see the video, could hear the testimony, and I made it very clear to them that the reason that I detained this man who attacked the Capitol, who attacked a police officer, sprayed him directly in the face, was that I considered this conduct to be an assault on democracy. And that was my decision. I said it in my written decision based upon the facts that I saw it. And I still don't hesitate sharing that, because it was a public record. That's what I said on the record, why I made my decision. And I hope to goodness that that's not seen as anything political, but I'm afraid that it may be. But Janice, so I don't know if any of y'all have had those cases and how you talk about them, but I can tell you, when anyone asks the question, I talk about it, because there's a intense campaign to act as if it never happened and that it was a day of love, and that, in my opinion, would just be so wrong. So, Janice, you wrote a book review about the fellow you were talking about earlier. I don't know, but I thought it was really fascinating, because it's a book review, and maybe that's a little safer space. And it was in the Federal Bar monthly magazine, but Janice wrote it on a man who was just wrongfully convicted and I think incarcerated for 30 years. But you were pretty critical of a system that should have been criticized in Louisiana. Did you feel any discomfort in writing that, or was it really just the facts as they all came out?
I definitely thought a lot about it before I did it, and as I was writing it, and how far I wanted to go in criticizing the system. I speak very much in the book review to sort of his experience, but then I do paint with a broader brush, especially at the end where I say, if you
Hey,
think
Janice, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you just give a little background to give context to what you're talking about?
Sure, and many of you will have some familiarity with Calvin Duncan, because he spoke at both of our FJC conferences last year with me, if you will recall. So He was wrongfully convicted and served 28 years in Angola and was really wronged pretty much every step of the way, starting with his arrest and then his half-day capital murder trial, and then unable to get his records, unable to file his appeals, et cetera, and ended up becoming a prison lawyer. And then after he got out in 2011 with the help of the Innocence Project, he was later exonerated in 2021, but he goes on to get a law degree, and he's had some incredible successes as a lawyer. So he and his a civil rights activist who works with him a lot, Sophie Cull, got a book published earlier this year by Penguin, and it's terrific. It's called The Jailhouse Lawyer, and I wrote a lengthy book review of it for the Federal Lawyer. And that's what Michael is referring to. And I do have a lot of indictments.
And you were, yeah, I mean, you were critical and I think correctly of the trial judge, of the prosecutor, of the appeals court. But I think it needed to be said. So go ahead, and how did you deal with that? Your own reasoning, and
Oop, you just muted yourself, Michael.
maybe, the book review gave us a safer context because you're just reviewing a book. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think that definitely factored into it. I did feel like the book review was a little bit of a safer space. On the other hand, I am willing to wade in sometimes where probably more cautious, reasonable people wouldn't. I am regularly out there on implicit bias presentations and women and the law presentations, and that opens you up to increasing amounts of criticism in the current environment, especially when you're not in front of a lawyer audience. I found out, I think lawyers, probably because they risk being in front of me, won't take me on the same way non-lawyers will. So when we had our little planning meeting last time, I mentioned that I had been heckled by a CPA at a big Louisiana CPA conference. And, it's very uncomfortable. And I really thought about whether I wanted to get back in that position. And then I decided, yeah, I'm going to do it. I have something to say. I have a unique voice to be able to say that. And I'm going to stay out there. I did look at all my materials again to make sure that I was being fair, that I wasn't being unfairly critical of any particular race, gender, or anything else, and moved on. And I keep rolling it out.
But Janice, how have you dealt with it? Janice, when you want to talk about the truth, and the reality is women have been treated unfairly, blacks have been treated unfairly, poor people have been treated unfairly, and it's a historical reality. And so, how do you find your comfort level in doing that? Because it feels to me now that we're in a world when you talk about it, oh, that's DEI stuff, and boy, that's we can't talk about it, or that somehow suggests that we are no longer impartial because we actually recognize historical truths.
All very good points. And, do I strike the right balance all the time? I mean, it is basically impossible to make it warm and fuzzy for everyone in the audience, right? Because you can't water it down enough, or you can't sort of make it even-handed enough. I do try to, implicit bias is a really kind of a safer space for that, because we all harbor implicit biases. So I'm very careful to point out that women have biases against women, and African Americans have biases against African Americans, so that all the white men in the audience don't feel so targeted. And yet they do, I have come to find out, or at least the ones who are looking to feel that way. And that was certainly the case with that CPA, despite my huge efforts to make sure that, I was basically challenging everybody to do better. He clearly felt that he was under attack. So I don't think I have any pearls of wisdom, except that I did really think about whether to continue, and I decided more than ever it is important to continue to speak up, or I will become a part of the problem.
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and right, we had this come up in one of our workshops, and it's we were reading the book on trials in Nuremberg, and please, I don't want to sound extremist to make this analogy, but you will hear it often and often again as to how could all of this occur and the judges and the lawyers be so quiet about it. And I don't know about you all, but there are plenty of days in the recesses of my mind do I think that 20 years from now or 10 years from now, I will regret being quiet. I've made peace that I'm a judge, that this is my role, and that the best thing I can do in terms of justice for all is treat everyone who appears before me every day in a way that's just extremely fair and respectful. But it's not a big audience, and how do you make a bigger impact? So maybe we just all need to make some peace with that. Go ahead, see anyone else? Go ahead, Dina.
Okay, so I read an article again in the New York Times because I'm a New York Times junkie. That's my sole source of information sometimes about the immigration judges. And they were saying that that a whole bunch of them got fired, and that they thought that the firings were based on who appointed them or their rulings, and what their rates of letting immigrants out was. And they said that there is a tremendous amount of pressure right now from the administration for the administrative judges to just the immigration judges to just rubber stamp whatever the government is doing, and not even wait for responses from the immigrants. And that there's the threat is that if you don't do it, you're going to be fired. So people who are still on the bench are doing what they have to do to protect their job, as opposed to necessarily doing what they think their job really is. Now, granted, we're in a completely different situation than that, because we are not part of the executive branch. We are part of the judiciary. And so we have more independence than the immigration judges do. But someone had, or Michael, I think you've repeatedly said that your job is to follow the rule of law and to do whatever, follow the opinions that the Supreme Court is cranking out. Granted, I haven't had a case that is implicated by anything that the Supreme Court is ruling on, but as a judge, we also have a role of correcting the law when it's incorrect. And, we are not an appellate court. And so, no, we don't make law, but sometimes on the facts in front of you, you might think that a Supreme Court opinion is wrong or distinguishable, and you can write an opinion that is commensurate with what you think is the right thing to do, even if it doesn't follow exactly what the precedent says. I mean, the Supreme Court has been ignoring precedent since they started their term. But I think that our role, yes, we have to follow precedent. We don't make law, but there probably are some places where we can, try to change the law that we think is incorrect. And I haven't had that situation happen, but I know when I had a case a long time ago, it was an Obamacare case where somebody who was Catholic brought a suit against, then it was Obama, but then it got changed to Trump, and they dropped their opposition to the suit. But the somebody was saying that he didn't want to be a part of a Obamacare program because they allowed for birth control, and that was against his religious beliefs. And I wrote an opinion that basically said that he had other options and he didn't have to go through that plan. And, you know, I got into a whole thing about insurance, which I kind of knew a little bit about because I did some of that work when I was in private practice. And it was not consistent necessarily with other opinions that were out there, but I felt like I was taking an opportunity to educate the court in that instance.
Sure. And I do think that we have an opportunity to do those things to a certain degree in every opinion we write. Hey, Nancy, Joseph, I'm sure you're listening to every word, but I wanted to ask you something. So unmute yourself when you get a chance. There you are. Well, there you are, Nancy. My God, you're upside down. There we go.
There we go. There we
Okay.
go.
So Nancy, I know that again we're talking about public speaking and how do we handle this, but I know that a real push in your term as president was civics education, and I just think it would be helpful for you to talk about what should we be doing as judges? How can we really um, kind of, I don't know, live up to the high expectations that we have, and how can we meaningfully make a difference in civics education and public speaking, and how can we do that in a way that raises some important issues, but consistent with our roles as judges? And what have you found to be most effective, and how are you talking about these things? I'm not. There you go. Okay.
Thank you for convening us on this. Thank you, Janice, for your remarks. Dina, Willie, Marsha, I agree with everything that has been said. I think my approach, you know, we all have to do our own approach. I think my approach is to continue to do what we do and to look at what we're doing. If it's complying with our ethical obligations, we will be just fine. And the rule of canon does give us a lot of leeway and also encourages us to participate in civics education and public education. The times have changed some, but our rules have not changed. And I think for the most part, if we're, you know, doing our job, following the rules, we would be just fine. One area, while I know most of the people on the call are out in the classroom or out in the community, but one area where even within the scope of our job, let's take, for example, a naturalization ceremony that we all enjoy doing. And immigration's a hot topic. Are we going to change the message that we give during naturalization? I think most of us are given a message of welcome, a message of inclusivity, a message of celebrating our immigration heritage. Should we change those messages because the times, the winds have changed? I don't think so. So that's my answer, Michael. Keep doing what we're doing, follow the rules of canon, our canons, and we will be all right. And I do think we are in a special position to, by virtue of the position that we have and following the rule of ethics, the rule of canons, I think we're setting an example about what civic engagement look like, what civility look like. We're educating the public just by being who we are and doing our jobs well.
So Nancy, how would you answer this question? Because it came from a law student of mine in my class, and I just dodged it. I didn't answer it, and I didn't feel good about it, and so maybe I could use your help. She just simply said, "Are you in fear for the rule of law, given our times?" And I shouldn't comment on that right now. And no, everything's okay. It's great. The rule of law has never been better.
But right, because we don't want to appear to be liars, because people are reading, right?
Yes.
People are reading the news just like we're reading it.
Yeah.
But we can still take the opportunity to have a teaching moment maybe we don't share our personal opinions about the state of rule of law, but that question is an invitation to talk about what is the rule of law? Because it's it's a term that people use, and sometimes we use it to say different things. So that's a teaching moment to say, what is the rule of law? It's a teaching moment to talk about why is it important, right? So there's the second opportunity. And the third opportunity is, what role does the court and judges play in the rule of law, right? So there's a way for us to not get into our personal opinions, which, we could, potentially get us, a headline, but still use the questions as a teaching moment within what is prescribed for us. And again, as judges, yes, we can talk about the role of the courts in the rule of law. We can talk about what the rule of law is. That's all totally within our lane.
Yeah, and I do think that it's appropriate to talk about the separation of powers as envisioned by the founders. Three branches, and three branches for a reason. Here are their roles, and yeah. So, and again, this is the purpose of this, which is to how do we talk about these things in a way, because we have a chance to, I think, in an obligation to be talking about it. Go ahead, Dina.
I think another thing that you can say, without saying that you're afraid at this particular moment, is that the rule of law and democracy itself is something that is fragile. And we've been blessed in this country with having a country since 1776 under this incredible form of government, but that the rule of law is the foundation of that, and that, it's always under attack. And it always has been under attack in different ways and in different degrees, but that, it's important for it to survive in order for our form of government to continue the way that it is. So I think we can talk about the significance of the rule of law. In addition, I always talk about, what is the rule of law? What's the court's role? Those are very important and obvious things, and talk about separation of powers. But if you talk about the fact that democracy is fragile, we have been really lucky because our democracy has survived through a civil war even, and a lot of other things. But that democracy is something that has to be understood and appreciated, and people have to understand how the government is set up and how it's supposed to work in order for us to all make sure that it is working appropriately. Because if you don't really understand how it's supposed to work, how do you know that this is not normal? That is what I worry about, is that this younger generation has seen nothing but really outrageous activities and think that that is normal, when any one thing that has happened would have taken down a bunch of other governments, and all of these things are continuing to happen, and it's just being normalized. And so I think that people have to understand how our government is formed and how it's supposed to operate in order to appreciate whether it is operating correctly.
Yeah. No, I think those are really such important points. Just the fact that we serve as an educator, and just by talking about the separation of powers and the roles of the different entities, that hopefully it'll cause people to be more informed and process what they see going on in a little different way.
Michael,
Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, if I may add, with the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up this summer, I know that many of us will have invitations to speak to different classes, or may have classes visiting us in the courthouse. I just wanted to highlight that there are a lot of resources out there. I know, please always remember Rebecca Fanning with the AO. She'll have materials for us if we're concerned about, speaking outside of the lines. The court, the AO itself, will have some materials that would be available for us.
Do you know, Nancy, just to share, because I really appreciate you bringing that up, and you may not know this right off. I mean, if you were looking for those resources, where would you start? Just the AO website? I mean, is it?
Yes, on the
JNet,
JNet, on our JNet, there's a civics education page.
Okay.
And what I can do after the call is find the link and send it to you, Michael, and CC, and share it with people on the call. 'Cause I'm not that quick to cut and paste it into the chat box right now.
Okay. Yeah, if you would send it to CC, and then at least CC send it to everyone on this group. You know, we have, God, time flies. We have about 8 minutes left. I certainly, anyone else, I did want to mention something about naturalization ceremonies, which I think are great opportunities. But anyone have anything else they want to share, just a personal experience or what they did that was work? Did you want to share something, Robert? And you want to unmute yourself? There you go.
I do give a different speech now at naturalizations. I don't know when I started doing that, but it's a similar speech I gave back in 2018. So it's not that I mean, I'm careful. I make sure that whatever I say, I wouldn't mind being printed in a newspaper, but I do focus them, I talk about the things that we all talk about in terms of like our own immigration story. I have 2 children who are Korean, so I talk about their experiences.
Oh.
But I focus pretty heavily on our role in protecting their rights. And that seems to hit home. I mean, I sort of am surprised with the reaction, but a lot of tears, a lot of people coming up afterwards to talk to me about that specific thing. Just the idea that we exist as a separate branch to protect their rights on a very basic level. I tell the story about our training at the Holocaust Museum, and then I launched that into a discussion of almost kind of like a reassurance that they'll be okay, that this will, that they will not, that the country will be okay, that we'll be okay, that we will, survive these ups, and that it's our role as judges to make sure that they're protected. And it, like I said, it does seem to, but I do worry sometimes about it. I had one at an Elks Lodge right before the shutdown, and there was cameras there, so I was a little more, plan that one a little more ahead of time to try to make sure that whatever I said I was okay with, and it didn't really get a lot of coverage, which I was happy about.
Yeah. Well, but no, Robert, I think you hit the nail on the head. I can tell you, I am processing things before I speak, um, uh, more than I ever have in terms of that kind of setting. And certainly, I think as judges, we're always processing what we think because we have a record of everything we say. So we need to be very careful about that because it's permanent. But where are you, Robert? Where's your court?
I'm in Connecticut. I sit in New Haven.
Okay. Yeah. Um, Anyone else? Go ahead, Janice. I know
I-
you always do great stuff at naturalizations and immigrants, right? You sing the rap, don't you?
Yes, I repeat certain lines from
Hamilton.
Lin-Manuel Miranda from Hamilton, but to say that I rap would be quite a stretch. But I did want to remind everybody, if you remember a few years ago, we did the Denny Chin play of the integration of Ole Miss with James Meredith. And there's a whole series of those plays. And on Thursday, I'm rolling out the 3rd one I've produced here to several hundred people. And we're doing Korematsu. And you talk about a message for our time without it. Like, I almost feel subversive. This play is so good for right now, but we're not talking about this moment. We're talking about Korematsu. So there are multiple ways to deliver really big, important messages, and you should definitely take a look. And I can hook you up too. But the Second Circuit, Judge Denny Chin, he's the mastermind behind all of those, and it's a wealth of delivering important historical messages that have legal significance that are also relevant to our time.
Hey, Janice, do you mind sharing that with CC so she can share it with the group? And I think you're talking about this as the third production. If you don't mind sharing the all three with her. You know, did you want to say something, Gwen? Go ahead.
Just
Oh,
getting
okay.
just getting no, not at all.
That's okay. So, but we talked about opportunities, naturalization being one of them. And of course, I'm the grandson of Italian immigrants, and I make it very clear to them who I am, how I got here, and how we were discriminated against in many ways in the community that I lived in. We were paid less. We were excluded from homes. My first home excluded the sale of it to Negroes and people of Italian descent. Right in the deed, I framed it. And so I explained to them historically, it's just a fact. The also two things I share with them. Number one is a story of my grandmother, and she just remembered being on the boat coming over, being told that she did not belong. And I just looked at the whole crowd and I said, I can't think of three uglier words than to tell someone you don't belong. That's not who we are as Americans. It's who we've never been. We all belong. The other one is with the grand jury. And when I indoctrinate the grand juries, I tell them how important they are. That when we in England, the king could just indict and throw in jail whoever he wanted, but not in the United States. Citizens do that, and that's why they're so important. And I think those are just simply lessons to teach. And then finally, at naturalizations, we always have the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I remind them that we had a revolution because we didn't want one person to make rules that was unanswerable to no one. It's just part of our history and our democracy and who we are. You guys are probably so I just think we always have educational opportunities. Well, we are about done, guys. Did you want to say something though, Gwen? Or I'm just looking at you.
I didn't have this on my Central Standard Time. So
Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm just like bummed that I'm just now getting on. I was thinking it was 2:00 Central Standard Time.
Oh, okay.
So I missed the whole thing.
Oh my God.
But it sounds like I heard the important part. I heard your spiel, but I am so sorry. Oh my God.
Well, Gwen, you're my friend. Maybe we'll have a call and talk about it.
Okay.
But I think what we're going to do again, it's just so good to see such a response. And for me anyway, it's just the truth is balance in the bench. We kind of need each other. I think it's therapeutic. Who else do we have? And I think we need to be there for each other. So I think what we'll do, CC, is if you all watch your emails, we have a collection of some other topics that we identified as judges that we wanted to talk about in a setting like this. And I invite any of you, if you think of a topic that you want to put on our list, please send it to CC Snap. That's who you got the Zoom email from to set this up. If it's something new, put it on there. We're going to send out another quick questionnaire to decide what we want to talk about next time. Did you have something, Deborah, or were you just getting?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's 3:00. We always like to adjourn on time. Hey, thank all of you for what you're doing. God, we're just every day I'm so impressed, and thank goodness they're magistrate judges. My goodness. Hey, happy holidays to everyone. We'll probably skip December and do January, CC. Yeah, but great to see you all. Keep doing what you're doing, right? One case at a time, one interaction at a time. Never underestimate what power we have in that. So always wonderful to see y'all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.